So my report is about PAS models, centralized or decentralized. The current employment challenges call for transformation of public employment services institutionally and structurally. Many countries have been undergoing this process, and we wanted to analyze the experience, or simply just to take a look at what's happening, where the countries are headed, and generalize the experience. This is why we conducted comparative analysis of the experience and best practices in countries with centralized and decentralized PS models. We wanted to look where they went in their transformation process or where they're planning to go. So how we collected the data. We created a survey, a questionnaire, which was sent over to the PS in many countries. Unfortunately, we were a little bit pressed for time, so the time frame was limited, and only 20 countries were able to respond. And my presentation is going to be based on those responses from the 20 countries I mentioned. So we didn't resort to any readily available information, and we processed the data using the wording and the presentations that were done by the countries. The survey was conducted in June, July this year, so that's relatively recent, except Australia, whose report was sent in later and is available as addendum to the report. I think you received the report in your handouts. So, representation of our survey. As I said before, 20 countries responded to the call, 17 of which are European, the most disciplined ones. So essentially we covered 40% of the European countries that are WAPES members. So we can say that this survey is representative for Europe, and non-European respondents include Canada, Australia, and the Philippines. So we'll take it that the survey is representative of the European situation, and other countries and regions can look up to this analysis for information. So the authors, as authors, we would like to express our immense gratitude to the experts who spend their precious time away from a huge amount of work to reply. So thank you very much. I believe that the more experts like yourselves are involved in conducting these surveys, the better info we get. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, to the substance of the report. What is the overall trend? Centralization, decentralization. First, we looked at how many countries reformed their PS or didn't reform their PS over the last 10 years. This slide shows you that 14 out of 20 respondents reformed their PS, which is quite a lot, essentially 3/4. 75% of the countries that responded carried out reforms in this or that way. Look at the dates. In 2000, a reform was carried out in the Philippines, but if you look at other countries, the tempo and occurrence of reforms is picking up close to today. Only 6 countries refrained from reforms: UK, Germany, Italy, Canada, Macedonia, and Switzerland. So what we have as a result? Overall, the PS system is mostly centralized. So we have 10 countries with the centralized PS. Decentralized system is used in 7 countries, and 3 countries, Russia, Finland, and Australia, have identified their systems as a third type. But if you take a look at the Finnish PS, their system appears more of centralized, whereas in Russia it looks decentralized. And Australia is quite particular in that regard. The policy development rests within the state, but the service delivery is delegated through tenders to different organizations, including NGOs, with monitoring by the State Department. So they have a third type, essentially, whereas Russia and Finland are intermediary. So, what seems to be the most interesting part? The overall change trend in the organizational structures is as follows. So we ask the question: what kind of changes have been made over the past 10 years, and what are the plans? So, over the past 10 years, 4 countries strived to centralize their PS. As for decentralization, it happened in 7 countries. So apparently the trend is for decentralization. Other, 2 countries, and no reform at all in 6 countries. The forward-looking plans. Centralization is planned in 2 countries, decentralization in 6 countries, other in 2 countries, and no reforms at all in 10 countries. Let's take a look at the distribution. So the way I suggest you look at this table is what is underlined are the countries that maintain their status quo. They are not changing anything. In green, we see the Czech Republic that first centralized, but in the near future is going to reverse the order, aiming at more decentralization, trying to find the best equilibrium between centralization and decentralization to meet the needs of the country. In red, you can see Italy, which is the only country that never carried out any reforms at all, but that is going to centralize. What appears of interest is that the countries that haven't done anything over the past 10 years in terms of PS reforms do not want to reform in future, with the exception of Italy. Otherwise, countries try to maintain the current state of affairs. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there are 5 countries that have recently carried out reforms: Russia, Turkey, Finland, Montenegro, and Sweden. And they are not planning to do anything in the near future. So, been there, done that, don't want to interfere at all. So, there are countries that want to continue their reforms or intensify those reforms, like Croatia, for example. So, Croatia essentially decentralized. And in their questionnaire, they replied that they're going to continue with decentralization. Why they're classed as other is because they want to use other tools as well. However, in essence, they're decentralizing. The next part of the questionnaire had to do with strengths of different organizational models of PS. So, what conclusions can we make here? Thinking of the words of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, there is no perfection in the world. So, strengths of one model can be matched by strengths in other systems. So if you look at the summary of our survey, you'll see that the countries are trying to mix different systems to localize and to make it more efficient for the local needs. So what was noted by the countries with centralized model? So rational finance and robust control system. However, if you look at weaknesses, ease of access, promptness of response, etc., they have scored quite low. And these things that came out as weaknesses in decentralized model are seen as strengths. And I'm talking absolute numbers here. So 20 countries participated, no use in trying to calculate percentages. So essentially this is the number of countries that responded. So ease of access, prompt response to challenges, availability of access by the population to PA system in decentralized models are seen as strengths. However, financial framework and control measures are not seen as strengths in decentralized models. Under the heading Other, you can see that three countries, well, are not quite representative, although they did note that finance framework and prompt response to labor market challenges strengths. So basically the conclusion is there are pros and cons in each system. And so as for the structure, take a look at the next slide. You can see that there are no major differences between different organizational levels in centralized and decentralized PSs. So I tried to make it as vivid as possible for you in order to show that the number of levels and their combinations are present no matter what the model is used, centralized or decentralized. It is also a function of the size of the country, whether it's a mono country or a multinational country. Background and history play an important role in how the PS is shaped, and it's a more important factor than the centralized or decentralized model. In terms of different functions, so I single out the development of active programs and try to show you how differently the countries that responded approach to handling this matter. There is no big difference between countries with centralized or decentralized PS in terms of delegating various functions to lower levels of organizational structure. So in terms of active programs, you can see the results here. The control function is the one function that stands out as with a big difference between centralized and decentralized model. In the centralized model, the control is in the headquarters, whereas in the centralized models, control is spread at the regional organizational level, sometimes resorting to the headquarters as needed. So one can safely say that this is conditioned by the history of the country, and, if I may put it so, the art of creating this model in this or that country. The models are rather different. The content is varying. There are nuances and particularities. So I believe that search for uniform standard is quite useless, so we may only take into account overall trends and some of the main findings. So we have 4 findings. Among the respondents, centralized model is most spread, whereas there is a significant trend for decentralization at the same time. Number 2, most national models of PS have both centralized and decentralized features, so there is no pure centralized or decentralized model in action. So countries strive to combine the features of both models. Number 3, strengths of the centralized models: finance framework and robust control, whereas for decentralized, ease of access, prompt response to labor market challenges, and close cooperation with social partners. And number 4, the last finding, is there is no correlation between the distribution of authority among different levels in different PS models. However, control function is the most striking difference between centralized and decentralized. In centralized, it's at the top, whereas it's delegated in the decentralized. Thank you for your attention.